The return of Donald Trump. Cabinet 2.0 sets the agenda. With immigration hardliners at helm. Red flag for green cards. Visa fears grip Indian immigrants. Can Trump afford to lose skilled Indians?
Team Trump 2.0 is being unveiled one by one, and the world is watching closely. In the past few days, a flurry of reported appointments have been made for the Trump administration, taking in some of his staunch loyalists into his cabinet. After Susie Wiles as the chief of staff, Donald Trump has reportedly picked Tom Homan as his border czar, Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, Mike Waltz as his NSA, Stephen Miller as the Deputy Chief of Staff, and Kristi Noem as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, as well as Elise Stefanik as the UN Ambassador. Now, among them, except Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, who are known for their pro-India stance in the last Trump presidency, others have the immigrants worried. Stephen Miller, for instance, is someone who is known to have helped craft the previous Trump immigration policy that saw families breaking up at the border, while South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem has pledged to carry out mass deportations. While this concern has risen since Donald Trump swept this year's election, the 2023 Asylees Annual Flow Report by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security states that the number of Indians seeking asylum in the U.S. has surged dramatically over the past 3 years. Asylum applications from India soared by 855%, rising from 4,330 in FY21 to 41,330 in FY23. Nearly half of these applicants are reported to be from Gujarat. In 2023, Indians ranked as the 5th largest group for defensive asylum and the 7th largest for affirmative asylum applications. As per the report, 5,340 Indians were granted asylum last year. Will Indians now rethink, as Donald Trump is clearly setting and shaping his second-term agenda? Let's get a wider perspective on this. On Global Mirror, I'm joined by Karen Giorno. She's a former White House and Trump advisor. I'm also joined by Mr. Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I'm also joined by Vinesh Menon, Director General, CEO, ARISE. Good evening. Namaskar to all of you. Mr. Raymond Vickery, let me begin with you. These are, of course, reports still coming in one after the other. We are listening and, seeing names that are cropping up, the latest, of course, being that of Kristi Noem. How are you seeing Team Trump 2.0 as far as, the so-called immigration hardliners are concerned?
Well, thanks very much for having me, and namaskar. I really am very, very concerned about the appointments. Stephen Miller, particularly, is a known hardliner, the author of The Separation of Families at the Border in order to discourage people from coming in. And I would point out that the movement of peoples between India and the United States has been a bedrock pillar in supporting the relationship between the United States and India, whether it be for immigration or whether it be temporary visas such as H-1B or student. The ability of Indians and Americans to move back and forth between these territories has been fundamental to the relationship. And I think that's very much in jeopardy at this point, and I would hope that Indians and the Indian authorities would step up and point out the difficulty. It is not the case, as Steve Miller has said, that America should be for America and Americans only. That does not take account of the needs on both sides for the movement of skilled people, for the movement of people who need to keep their families together and need to promote the relationship between the two greatest democracies on earth, India and the United States. So I think it's very, very troubling.
Sure.
and we see nothing but hardliners being put into place. We see nothing from the president-elect except that he intends to start the deportations on day one, and doesn't really make a great deal of a difference between people who are here for legitimate reasons and ones which may not, which is, as I say, very, very troubling.
Okay. Karen, you want to respond to what Raymond Vickery is saying. There are huge concerns, in fact, not just within the Indian immigrant community, but all immigrants in the United States right now. There's a huge concern. There are fears that this immigration hardline policy that Donald Trump 2.0 and his team will take now will see a deja vu of sorts from his previous presidency, which saw families being separated. Those were heartbreaking, overwhelming scenes at the border.
Thank you for having me. All due respect to your guest, the topic of immigration right now, with regard to the transition team in place, is discussing the plan for how to deal with the migrant crisis that affects the United States of America currently and over the past 4 years, the massive numbers that have come over our borders. 700,000 of them have criminal backgrounds. So I do believe that the priorities that were outlined by the president during the campaign and now as president-elect is such that he will first look at the priority points on immigration, which is to look at those who have come over illegally and that have criminal backgrounds to deal with this portion of that population first. I've heard nothing about legal immigration and status of different individuals who have visas that are legally here. That is a very, very low priority. Right now, we're dealing with the crisis at our border.
Okay, Karen, I absolutely understand what you're saying about illegal immigration, but I also want to ask you then about the concerns that Indian immigrants had in the previous Trump presidency, which was that of the H-1B visas and the H-4 visas of the spouses that were, delayed in getting their approvals, which was taken as, as something which was done to hint and indicate to the Indian immigrants that, you're not welcome here. There will be visa delays. There will be a lot of problem that you'll be facing. And first and foremost, Americans will be preferred over you when it comes to, employment.
Look, I understand that people are nervous and or looking toward what this new administration is going to do regarding that issue specifically. But I just would like to remind people that while this is the same president, it's a new administration. Every particular order of business will have to take place under this new regime, and everything will be looked at again through a different lens. This is not 4 years ago. It is not 8 years ago. It is 2024 going into 2025 with a new administration, with a new understanding of how to address this particular issue. It's not going to be the same. The priorities are to look at the illegal immigration problem that has occurred over the last 4 years. Again, this has been a stress on and a strain economically and culturally and with resources on local communities, state communities in states, and across the nation. So those right now, the transition team is looking at what to do on day one, since the president has a mandate. He ran on this issue, and the American people overwhelmingly elected him for a second term. And so in the first 100 days, this will be addressed, and probably fairly quickly.
Okay. Before I get in Raymond Vickery to respond to you and whether we are judging Donald Trump 2.0 too early, let me get in Vinesh Menon into this conversation. Vinesh Menon, we've been talking about these details that have come out of a report by the Department of Homeland Security, where they've said between 21 and 23, Indian asylum seekers grew by 855%. Now, that's a huge rise. And while it is concerning, it also stems from the fact that perhaps in the US, the asylum route is easier to take than other routes that it provides for immigrants to get into the United States. But as far as Indian immigrants are concerned, what do you think? Is that big American dream still alive, or are there still concerns within the community as regards to whether we should now be going to the US?
Thank you. Thank you, Shreya. And I think I'm going to stick to, while I understand that your question is around the asylum seekers in the US, I think I'm going to stick to the world of education and students who go there, because that is what I'm concerned with as an
Sure.
educationist. And I think there I'd like to present two or three factual pillars, and then one area which is perhaps a little perceptional. Uh, Fact number one is yes, America is a very favorite destination of a lot of Indian students. I think they get better education facilities, better stay facilities, they have better employment opportunities, and therefore, I think the number of students who are going to the American universities are definitely increasing at a double digit almost year on year. I think it's almost about 30%. But don't forget, it is the same Indian students who's also contributing to the American economy. I think nearly $40 billion has been contributed by them to the economy, and I think last year alone, close to about $8 billion has been, it's got into the American economy thanks to the Indian students. I think the president-elect knows that. Second, let's not forget, while
Yeah.
India is the fifth largest economy with 3.8 billion trillion dollars of GDP, it is still one sixth of that of the American economy, and therefore, by default, you do see an opportunity out there, and therefore people do want to go there. Uh, Having said all this, and while I think Mr. Trump is
Hmm.
like any other leader trying to ensure that he plays a good president to a country, and obviously, when you play a good president to a country, you have to take care of your country first. While he's doing that, I think he's also a
Yes.
diplomat. He understands the India-US relations. He understands that one of the key factors of his victory was thanks to about 2.5 million Indians across the United States, and I think he knows that. That's a data point which he's well aware of. Many of Trump's cabinet is perhaps going to be filled with Indo-Americans. I think there's a lot of Indo-American advisors who have been there with Trump during this entire campaign, and I think Donald Trump has been very vocal about things that he's going to change. He is after illegal immigration. He is after trying to correct education within the country. What I pick up again is that he is attempting to work on accreditation frameworks to try and make the education institutions far more productive. So these are two or three factual areas. A third factual area, of course, is the fact that India needs to beef up its own education system. The fact is, over the last 10 years, our population has gone up from 1.3 billion to 1.45 billion. And within the same period, we have been trying to work on areas. 300 new universities, 5,000 new
Yeah.
colleges, seven IIMs, seven IITs, and a slew of education institutions that's come up. We are attempting to try and create a scenario where our students see value in our own country than to go to America. So while that is happening on one side, I doubt if Mr. Trump is going to make a massive change overnight in this particular area. And therefore, the perception really that everything is going to come to a standstill, visas are going to get cancelled, perhaps not. Uh, but at the same time, should India be complacent? No, I think we need to figure out ways and means to beef up our own system. And the recent policy changes with the national education policy, etc., has started to make those changes. So to answer your question, I wouldn't be
Yeah.
overly
Important.
panicky at this point. I think we must wait for the administration to take charge and
Yeah.
put out the various regulatory framework. And my guess is that nothing will be done to dramatically affect the entire process. But yes, illegal immigration, I think that's a very valid point.
Yeah, important point there, Vinesh. Mr. Raymond Vickery, do you want to come in on that? The fact that perhaps we're judging Donald Trump too early this time around, perhaps, these fears are a little unfounded when you talk about the kind of agenda he set for illegal immigration. And the fact of the matter is, why would Donald Trump want to lose out on skilled workforce that contributes to the American economy?
Well, one lives in eternal hope that the president-elect and his administration will take a reasonable and humane approach to the problem. But we have very little evidence of that thus far. There was a bipartisan solution that was worked out with some of the most conservative members of the Republican Party to be able to address the immigration problem. And nobody's saying there is not an immigration problem. But Donald Trump torpedoed that in favor of his own predilection for being able to demagogue on this issue, talking about immigrants eating cats and dogs and the pets of people, talking about murderers and rapists, that we were the garbage can for the world. Now, people can say, "Oh, well, that's just talk during a campaign," and one hopes that it is. But past indications are that these things are not just talk. And when you put in people like Stephen Miller, and you say that on day one we're going to start the roundup, and you say, well, it's illegals, okay, but that's 11 million people who have children, people who are contributing to the economy in some cases. They are not just the dregs and criminals from around the world. And so, yes, you're going to have some court intervention. You're going to have some sanity brought into the process. And to be able to say, oh, well, none of that's been decided when Donald Trump has come out against birthright citizenship, which is another bedrock of the American system under the 14th Amendment, when he's talked about incessantly about foreigners taking Americans' jobs. And when you have a man like Stephen Miller who says America's for Americans and Americans only, to be able to say, well, don't worry about it. It's only the bad guys who are going to go out of here and not going to be affected by this program, it seems to me is not consistent with the reality. As I said earlier, I hope that India and the Indian authorities will be able to work with the Trump administration to ameliorate and make more humane some of these approaches which have been exhibited thus far. But to say there's no reason for alarm when the man is pledged to be a dictator on day one, and that this is his top priority to get not just a few criminals, but millions out of America immediately is a difficult pill to swallow.
Okay, Mr. Vickery, let me get Karen to respond to you. Karen Giorno, Raymond Vickery has some valid points as far as, words matching actions are concerned. What would you like to say to that?
Well, again, the election is over and the American people have spoken, and they sided with the policies over personality, and they want the border fixed. They want the immigration problem addressed. Now, just a quick history lesson. In the turn of the century, 20th century, we had an influx of immigrants. We set up Ellis Island in order to receive the immigrants and to vet them and to help assimilate them into our country. We don't have that process right now. The Biden-Harris administration has opened our borders. They have literally flooded millions of people into our country and given them taxpayer-funded debit cards and housing and healthcare. We just, yesterday was Veterans Day here in the United States of America. We honor our veterans. It's a national holiday. Our veterans are not being taken care of because all of these resources that were literally put towards our the least among us have been strained with illegal immigration, with the illegal immigration problem. This cannot go in perpetuity. All of these people coming into the United States of America have to be taken care of. There's no solution to this problem. Therefore, I would argue, what do we do about it? If we don't deport them, do the taxpayers pay for them in perpetuity forever and ever and ever, and don't close the borders and continue to have people come over? This is an illegal immigration problem. We're not even addressing those who are applying legally to come into this country for visas. That's going to be a very low priority in the first 100 days, and probably, I would argue, in the first 2 years of his administration before the midterm elections. So I would take it down a notch and allow the president to govern going into his second term.
Raymond Vickery, one of the things that has been held against both the Democrats and the Republicans has been the fact that there's a lot of talk about reforming the immigration system, bringing in, a comprehensive immigration reform, but none of the parties have been able to do so far. Look at the Biden-Kamala administration, look at the kind of accusations they had against them. There was no substantial reform that they brought into the immigration system as well. Mr. Vickery, are you able to hear me?
Is this a question addressed to me?
Yes, Mr. Raymond Vickery, this is for you.
Well, first of all, this business about that there have been vast resources that have been diverted from veterans and other sources, it just is not true. That is something which has been debunked all time and time again. The question is whether or not you are going to have a comprehensive approach. And as I said earlier, the fact is it had been worked out with some of the most conservative members of the Republican Party to be able to address this. And Donald Trump torpedoed it because he didn't want to have a solution to it. He wants a political issue to be able to demagogue on. So, and the idea that say, don't worry about the legal immigration because that's going to be put off for a couple of years, to me is laughable. Because it's not laughable, really. What it's to be taken very seriously. That says, yeah, we're going to do something immediately about 11 million people, but then we're going to see about you, you other guys who are taking jobs from America. This is not something that's just to be judged by the question of who won the election. It's to be judged by a question about human rights, about what is the right thing to be able to do. Just because a majority of people vote for a particular person doesn't mean that standards, legal and moral, go out the window. It means that you have to be able to follow those standards even more closely.
Okay, let me get in a quick word from Vinesh, and then I'm going to wrap this discussion up. Vinesh, we've been talking about Indians going out for education, the students especially. Does that still hold, and does that still hold significance among Indian youngsters, or are they still, are they sort of considering now staying back, looking at the NEP, looking at the kind of reforms that are being brought into the education sector? Is that a consideration now?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, but unfortunately, it's not yet reached proportions as to what they should be reaching. Yes, it is true that there is a big attempt to try and reform the education system, but the very size of the country's education sector, 1.4 million schools, of which you just have about 300,000 private schools, and the rest of them
Yes.
are government schools. And even though there's a slew of new universities and colleges that have come in, it's far too less to keep pace with the population and the growth that's happening in India. So to that extent, yes, there is hope. It's being watched.
Okay.
The local folks, especially the students, are starting to see that there is an attempt to try and make a change. I think even there have been some good
Okay.
moves. FDI is now 100% into education, which technically means you can have foreign money coming in to try and set up universities and colleges in India.
Yeah.
You got opportunities to set up universities in gift cities. So all this is good, but till it actually takes shape, becomes a full-blown infrastructure, and starts delivering the education pedagogy into the system, that is going to still take a little time. So yes, I do
Yeah.
see that over the next decade there could be a
Hmm.
slight, southward movement of people go to the US. But if you ask me what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, no, I think it's still going to be pretty strong. The fact is that
Okay.
institutions like us, ARISE, is going to be working closely in the sector to try and see how we can change all this. But to answer your question, no,
Sure.
I don't see an immediate arrest, but the hope is definitely very, very high.
All right, we'll leave it there. Let's wait and watch how Trump 2.0 pans out, not just for the United States of America, but the entire world. Thank you very much, Raymond Vickery, Karen Giorno, and Vinesh Menon, for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.